My name is Tiffany Spraggins-Payne. You are listening to Zigzag, a weekly podcast discussing women in science, technology, transportation, engineering, entrepreneurship, mathematics, and related industries. On Zigzag, we discuss inclusion and diversity news, current trends, and have special guests speak about their experiences, including their competitive edge in the marketplace.
Hey everybody, this is Ryan Martin, the producer for the Grit Studios. This week's episode of Zigzag is with Kimberly McGlonn, PhD, teacher, and the founder of Grant Blvd. Now normally Tiffany introduces the guests at the very beginning, but Dr. McGlonn was dropping some awesome gems before the interview even really started, so we decided to just include everything. So you're also going to hear me chiming in for the first few minutes of the interview. Now the whole thing was about an hour, so we broke it into two parts, and this is part 1 of 2. Real quick before we get into the interview, we want to tell you about Lighting the Torch, a cocktail party and networking event that's coming up in October, hosted by our parent organization, the Enterprise Center, in partnership with the Minority Entrepreneurship Development Week. Now, the funds raised are going to support the Enterprise Center's programs to accelerate the growth of minority-owned businesses. Lighting the Torch takes place Thursday, October 4th, 2018, from 5:30 to 7 p.m. at the Enterprise Center located in West Philadelphia. Learn more and purchase your tickets online at ltt2018.eventbrite.com. That's ltt2018.eventbrite.com. And that link will be below in the show notes. Without further ado, here we go. And we're recording, so whenever you're ready to jump into it. Okay. You have permission to drop some awesome knowledge.
Some of those gems, please.
Yes.
I will do my best.
Keep dropping.
I will do my best. Yes.
Yes. I am so excited about this. You have no idea. I've been reading your thing. I'm really excited.
Yay! I'm excited too.
This is probably a dumb question since you clearly work in EMI and mass incarceration. But did you see that Doc 13?
Of course, it was pivotal. It's been pivotal. Yeah. And it continues to be pivotal. I don't want to talk too much, but
we're recording.
Great. Then we'll just go in. I actually I had the opportunity to visit Smithfield Correctional Facility in Huntington, Pennsylvania. I guess it was maybe 2 weeks ago now, almost 2 weeks ago. One of the things that I had a chance to talk to about with some of the inmates who are there is 13th and how pivotal it's been even in their own understanding of the systems that are at play in their incarceration.
That's
so,
awesome.
and it's, and this project that I'm working on now, this brand, is so much connected to pivot, kind of my own pivot away from 13th and my own sense of activism in response to Ava DuVernay's work.
Yeah.
And just trying to, that idea of leveling up, that idea of trying to figure out what does resistance look like, what can it look like, and for me that meant sitting in the intersections of sustainability and figuring out how to bring to market goods that set in direct conversation with the need to take action about criminal justice reform. That movie lays out the case very clearly, very succinctly, I think, and I think in a way that's relatively accessible to most people about just how marred our system is in terms of its not only its inability to correct behavior, but to add to compound what is actually, trauma and dysfunction.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that in watching that, and I first approached that movie actually in thinking about my 11th grade classroom. I've been teaching for about 15 years in a high school in the suburbs. And I was teaching English courses. I'll be going back in the fall and going back to my classroom for spending more time and talking about mass incarceration, and getting them to understand even canonical literature like To Kill a Mockingbird and Fences, which are the two texts I used. Yes. So let's bring this out of just the historical context and let's bring it into a longer view of how this system has really worked to continue to oppress people who have historically been taken advantage of.
Yes.
To put it mildly, right? Because we could be
Very
much more
mildly.
aggressive about what that extent of that human rights violation exploitation has looked like. So documentary making is such a powerful way of telling a story of marginalization, and Ava DuVernay's to me is that one of the highest standard bearers for what that can look like. But I do think that every industry has an obligation to figure out what will it do to positively impact the planet and people. And that was really the birth of my company, Grant Blvd, was how can I bring to light, a new ambition, a new model for what we expect from companies, and just as consumers, how do we demand more? And that was kind of like the brainchild, was in part 13th, in part there's another great documentary, I don't know if you've seen it, it's called The True Cost of Fashion. It captures how problematic in terms of the environmental impact our fashion industry has on our water quality, on our air quality, and on human rights. Like we are able to buy clothes for so cheap because one thing that we're really disconnected from, is who our makers are.
Yeah, it's the exportation of poverty.
Exactly. And when we become comfortable, as we have become comfortable, buying goods that are made on the backs of people who are being paid pennies to the dollar, to the hour in terms of like their labor. Yeah, we can buy that shirt, and I'm not going to name too many brands, but there are most brands we can buy shirts for $5, $6, $7 that are only going to get us through 2 wears, 2 washes, and that is able to happen. The numbers behind that are rooted very, very firmly in the exploitation of brown people, and that's just what it is. And so, as a person who is very much so still aware of the impacts of slavery on everything that makes up this land that we live on, that we call home, I am at a place where I can't feel comfortable about continuing to take advantage of people who I know are being exploited. And I think that there is we're in an important position to be able to think more critically about who we do business with and what they do to the planet and what they do for the people who work for them. And that's a huge task. That kind of reformation, thinking about one word that is sitting with me right now is that idea of reform and reimagination. If we're going to figure out a way of saving our planet from what is definitive, as far as I'm concerned, the science is clear that climate change is real and that climate action is absolutely required at this point.
We're over the point of where it's required.
Exactly, right?
Right now we're trying to minimize the damage, not avoid it.
Exactly.
Trying to keep it to 2 degrees instead of 5. Exactly.
And the only way that we're going to get there is if every part of our supply chain is in direct conversation with our sense of responsibility to the future of this planet. And until we start being really a lot more savvy and a lot more, going back to that word, demanding of how we source goods, of who we give our dollars to, that not only is our planet doomed, but every other system is doomed as well. If our environment is at this perilous state, and that goes, that, we're there, right? It's not like we're going to get there. Record temps they're going up every year for the planet. If we don't take seismic action immediately across our supply chain, then I just think about my daughter. I have a 10-year-old, and I've been a teacher for years. I think about all those young people who I've loved, and I think about what my legacy is to them is from a consumer level. And I shopped at thrift stores. I'm gonna tell you that right now. I'm a big thrift store shopper.
So I'm gonna hold you right there because I'm a huge thrifter, and I want to jump right into this interview.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because we're really diving into some meaningful and meaty work right now that I really want to explore further. So, Dr. McGlonn, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to do something a little unorthodox than what we've done historically. Normally, I introduce you right off the bat, but because we've jumped right into the interview, I would love for you to define sustainability, because a lot of what you were sharing has a lot to do with the triple bottom line, right?
Absolutely.
The people, the place, and the profit.
Absolutely.
And so could you talk a little bit about, the impetus for Grant Blvd, but first, talk about it from the terms of sustainability.
Absolutely. Sustainability is defined really broadly. It's a term that I think in ways has served the conversation about the environment well, because it's been able to capture so many different approaches. But I think in ways I'm always concerned that it's also very kind of alienating because it is a little bit opaque. Right. So what I mean by that, when I say opaque, for some people, sustainability means thinking about how your fabrics are sourced. Are they sourced using organic practices in terms of the treatment of soil and plants and the animal species that surround a crop? For some people, it means how are we doing in terms of our water usage? Are we being mindful of how much water we use when we produce certain crops? For other people, sustainability means just fair wages. How are we our supply chains in conversation with the people who we're employing? So, and I like that. And I think that it's beautiful that we can capture both environmental responsibility and ethics in one term. But for every brand, every company who uses that term sustainability, I think that we have to acknowledge as consumers that means different things for different people. And we have to be clear about kind of diving deeper into when companies use that term, what exactly do they mean? So for me as a business owner, as someone who's interested in sustainable apparel and sustainable design, it means right now in our first collection, it was about finding the highest standard of sustainable sourcing, which means no new fabric, no new chemical use, no new water waste. So again, as a person who loves thrift stores, I grew up in thrift stores.
Yes.
It became, how can we take the literally hundreds of thousands of tons of fabric that are sitting in thrift stores across this country and reimagine them, breathe new life into what we wear. And so, you can't see it, but the shirt that I have on now is from a reclaimed men's shirt. And for this first line, that was the ambition. Can we go in through thrift stores and source men's shirts, very much so awake and alive into and listening to Me Too and the need to kind of think about how we've allowed sexism to permeate all of our institutions, all of our systems, and use this very important cultural moment to reclaim fabric that was once in fact owned and worn by men. And so that's what we did with this first collection. But there are other approaches that we're definitely interested in playing with. Next spring, the hope is to move into hemp. And the reason why I am so connected to hemp is because someone who is an activist in terms of thinking about ending mass incarceration, about substantial criminal justice reform.
Yes.
Too many people are in jail because of violations related to drugs broadly, marijuana specifically. And I just see it as a really important political position to take, to say, you know what, not only can we source fabric sustainably using hemp, but how about we engage in a broader conversation about how hemp has been kind of pirated by the powers that be as a mechanism for social control.
Wow.
And so that's another thing. I'm just like, man, we can do better. Hemp is a beautiful fabric. I would love to talk to you about that. Hemp has so many, it's so hardy. It takes so little fertilizer, so little chemical intervention. It can be used in paper and fabric. And there's so many uses. It's really a miracle plant.
Yes.
And when I think about the future of this line, when we finish our crowdfunding, we've met our goal and we do our next round of crowdfunding, because that's what business is continue to find new mechanisms for getting capital.
Yes.
It's figuring out how can we bring into our production some plays on hemp. So for me, that's what sustainability means.
I love it. So I just want to let those who are tuning in, I just want to let them know that we've taken a little bit of a twist on Zigzag. We have Dr. Kimberly McGlonn in the house today. She is the founder and creative director of Grant Blvd. Dr. McGlonn has always been committed to civil and human rights. She is an activist, and on her lips, activism really stems from her parents, right? So you had a number of dinner table conversations around activism, and then you also grew up in the Black segregated Milwaukee. As a girl, you were raised as a Muslim. And as a woman, you loved not only men and women, but people alike. And you developed a deep sense of compassion for everyone. One of the things I love about your bio is it says that you appreciate diversity, the stories and traditions, right? And you have an affection for humanity as well as nurturing human existence. And you've traveled to 25 countries.
I have.
Wow.
I have. Most recently Kenya, which was just illuminating, to go and see how, thinking about our textile waste, to see it laid out on the streets of Nairobi. I think sometimes we think that we can dump our waste on other countries. It's not even a sometimes. That's our presumption, right? We outsource a lot of our garbage to other countries, oftentimes third world. China have been taking a lot of it, and recently they said, no, we're not taking your trash. So now we're sending a lot of it to Africa. So, a lot of Western African countries have taken what I think are pennies to the dollars. They've agreed to these deals that allow them to take our refuse. And so, and being in Nairobi most recently, it was fascinating to see how much so many of those things that we ship overseas in terms of textile waste, we consume more than any other country in the world. That's the American way. To see it being, just rotting literally on the streets, people stepping over it. So yes, I've traveled a good little bit. There's still a lot of world to see, but I've traveled a good little bit.
And you've managed to do this by creating a brand that doesn't use any water.
Well, we will eventually be partnering, talk about hemp production, which is hemp doesn't require as much water usage as, let's say, like an organic cotton, but we'll continue to play, playing these. I really think, if I just step back and pause for a bit, when I think about the solutions that our planet is going to need to kind of to heal, right? To recover from years of just damage and neglect.
Yes.
It's going to take a lot of experimentation in every industry. So from the fashion lens, from the apparel lens, I see this company as a beautiful opportunity opportunity to set up a model for what the sustainable play can look like. Because, we're going to continue to grow in our knowledge of what works for the planet. We're going to continue to grow in our knowledge of what new biotechnologies kind of emerge in terms of fabrics that are created that are more biodegradable than other fabrics and processes that are more gentle than other processes. And so there has to be in this business model, as far as I'm concerned as CEO, some flexibility in terms of just getting a sense of what works and what doesn't work, and how can we source things in a way that is ethical and that is responsible. And when I think about our manufacturing, part of the brand philosophy, and it's built into how we've developed our collaborations, is figuring out how to teach returning citizens how to sew. So yes, a big part of this mission of this brand is to find ways of bringing to market apparel that is constructed using, practices and policies that as CEO and creative director I can defend. But a part of that too is job creation and green manufacturing. We're not going to bring back jobs from China. That's not necessarily going to happen. And when we hear that a lot in the national kind of conversation that we're going to bring back these things and they're gone. But I do think that there is always a mechanism, an opportunity for us to create new avenues. And I'd like to see this company be one of those that is specifically dedicated to training returning citizens and how to sew, and then giving them the soft skills that they need to be successful employees. There's a presumption that people who come from the trauma of incarceration, the trauma of dysfunction in their communities, that there is an innate understanding of what it means to be successful in employment, and that's not my presumption as a CEO. So my ambition is to, in my collaborations with the Center for Returning Citizens, they've been pivotal in helping me to understand, how mass incarceration looks from the inside out, like literally being incarcerated to coming out and coming back home, and partnering with people who've been doing this work and living this life longer than I have, so that I'm not guessworking, how this is going to look. I'm meaningfully, purposefully partnering with people who are committed to this kind of approach as I am, because I can't do it without them. So I've been really settling into a space of just like deference. Just like I want to sit back and listen, observe. I want to sit in the flow. I want to get a sense of the vibe so I can do this work justice, because it's complicated work. We're new. We're doing our crowdfund. We have 2 more weeks on our crowdfund, and I've been kind of cultivating this idea of doing independent research in sustainability and understanding mass incarceration, what reform can look like, what efforts at reform have failed, so that I can deliver a process and a system that works for my employees and that works for my consumers when our products are ready for real full launch.
That's incredible. When I think about Grant Blvd, you are a sustainable apparel brand that supports incarcerated and returning citizens. When I was maybe about 5, and this may seem overly exaggerated, but it's so the truth. My grandfather, he is a well-learned man. He served. He was a vet. He worked for the post office, retired. He took another job. I have a lot of military folks in my family, but my grandfather, when I think about him, he, at the age of 5, put Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice book in my hand, right?
Wow.
And I'm like 5 years old.
That's a lot to process. That's heavy.
It's heavy. And the same with Richard Wright.
Oh, yeah.
Native Son. And so I'm bringing these up because you're doing some amazing work, even with Books Beyond Bars, right?
So excited about that.
Talk about that.
Where to start? In part, there's so many things. This is, I think, the beauty of this journey of being open to inspiration.
Yes.
Has come from my first desire, which was to be of service. And so I found out about Books Through Bars because I went there to volunteer. And I wish I could backtrack and say there was a definitive moment when someone put me on to Books Through Bars, but I don't remember that moment. What I remember is being there by myself. I didn't go with my girlfriends, didn't go with any of my friends. I went by myself to volunteer and reading those letters and having the physical experience, the tactile, personal experience of interacting with someone else's truth.
Yes.
And the truth in those letters was simple. It was, I'm incarcerated and I would like to learn blank.
Yes.
And that was so, as an English teacher, as someone who was, has loved literature, has loved learning, that was so simple to me.
Yes.
And then it became, how can I get books in? And I thought about Tom's, where he, in the beginning, Blake Mikowski, who was responsible for the brand Tom's.
Yes.
The shoe brand that's now doing other things. But he said, if I just give shoes and I ask my friends to donate shoes, that's kind of a limited kind of hustle. Yes. I need to think bigger. And so for me, and that experience and, of being with those those letters, it was how can I make a contribution to Books Through Bars that's consistent?
Yes.
And
local.
And local. And
Yes.
local. Which is actually also about, the mission to do like reducing carbon footprint.
Yes.
Like if I'm shipping books to California, that's energy, that's gasoline, that's environmental waste.
Yes.
And so that's the beauty of also shopping local, of supporting local businesses, is it's actually better for the environment. Who would have thought? But, when I think about Books Through Bars, and this is one of those things that I wish people knew, that there was more talk about. The number one request that they get is request for dictionaries. So as someone who is, this role of CEO, it means doing so many jobs. It's like 10, 12, 15 jobs. I don't know. I could probably break it down to 15 jobs. One of them is curating this book collection for Books Through Bars and being, responsible for thinking about what are we as a brand giving them. And that's begun already. In the crowdfund, there is one category is if you give this much, we'll donate a book to Books Through Bars. And so it's me sourcing, looking for dictionaries. And it's not about buying new dictionaries, because believe it or not, there are thousands of books right here in Philadelphia that are ultimately going to make their way to landfills, because like everything else about our consumption, we buy more books than we can house.
Yes.
And so it's how can we reduce landfill waste by still giving people access to books that oftentimes are actually in excellent condition. It's not like we're like finding, these books that are like pages ripped out and markers are, like they've been marked all in. Nope. Pristine books that we can just source and give them, donate them to Books Through Bars. So it's been a beautiful collaboration, and one that, like everything else I think this project is growing into, is completely rewarding.
Yes.
Because I'm so clear about, the work that needs to be done, and so excited about involving other people in what I hope to be a movement about thinking differently about how our relationship with our clothes, where they come from, who makes them, and then also our environmental impact, the choices that our environmental impact has, and the opportunity to just figure out how to support people who we know really don't have that many options. If you're returning from prison, it's incredibly impossible to get employment.
Yes.
People, are so suspicious of your character.
Yes.
It's incredibly difficult to get housing. It's difficult to be reunited with your children. There are a myriad of struggles that people who are returning face that oftentimes actually results in recidivism.
Yes.
And, so on one hand, it's like there's the conversation of how can we reduce recidivism, which is how can we reduce people's return to criminality and back into the carceral system. And that's something to think about. But for me, it's actually a higher ambition. It's how can we create communities of people who have shared experiences and have shared ambitions, which is just to have balanced lives. How can we reunite them with their families, help them to be of service in their communities, and give them the kinds of soft skills like how do we meditate? What's the usefulness of mindfulness? How can we move towards a more plant-based diet?
Yes.
There are all kinds of things that through my travels, through my reading, through the privileges of my life and grace that I've learned that have really helped me to, I think, be a pretty successful, self-sustained person that it's just knowledge that I'm excited to just put people onto. People who it's not really that they need a second chance. For a lot of people, they just need a first chance.
That's right.
You grew up in a poor neighborhood. You went to schools that were underfunded. Your family was struggling to figure out how to, to make things just kind of come together.
Yes.
And just trying to overcome years of systemic oppression.
Yes.
We just need a lot of unique supports. And I'm really, those who have, a lot have been given, a lot is expected. And that's just my attitude. I'm walking through the world in that space of like, I got to level up. I've spent years in dedicated service to making sure that kids who are going to voted with a sense of compassion. That was so important to me, and working in communities where people were just statistically more likely to be voters.
Yes.
And now my ambition has shifted beyond that. And it becomes like, how can I use my knowledge and my experience to be of help to people who I know need a first chance.
Yes. And speaking of turning lemons into lemonade, when I think about Jane Golden, who is the creator of the Mirror Arts program, what was it during Mayor Good's?
Yeah, I think that's where it started. Yeah, it's been around for quite a while.
Some gentlemen, some young guys, young black guys who were like graffitiing on a wall. And she was like, you know what? I have a restorative justice program that, that I'm going to implement, and we're going to beautify the neighborhood, and we're going to take care of that wall.
Yeah.
Looking at who you are and what your base is, which is a creative. We were talking about this a little bit offline. Like Jane Golden is a creative.
Yeah.
And she used her creative platform to cultivate and co-create an opportunity for social justice and restorative justice. And essentially, that's what you're doing through having sustainable apparel brand. So just talk to us a little bit about how did you land here? Like an apparel brand, sustainability, trying to reduce recidivism.
I started in ways, I think, thinking about, It's so hard to figure out when it comes to the fierce whirlwind that for me is creative energy and inspiration, which muse sat with me first.
Yes.
If the first muse that visited me was one that really told me that I need to think differently about the planet. And in truth, that's always been a part. I think part of it is that these are not new narratives for me. Like, this is a new manifestation of an ancient song. My father was an organic gardener on the north side of Milwaukee. He took great pride in being a provider for us and being present in our lives, going to us on field trips and just making sure that we had our needs more than met. He was very clear about setting up that ambition, but his personal ambition was to bring healthy foods to people living on MLK Drive in Milwaukee. I'm thinking about Jay-Z. He said, "I'm good on MLK Boulevard," and I really, I'm in conversation with that.
That's awesome.
But my dad, they opened King Drive Deli.
Wow.
And even though we lived in a middle class, upper middle class neighborhood on Grant Blvd, the name of this company is very much so. It sits in direct conversation with my autobiography. I grew up in a house on the corner of Grant Blvd, and it was in that house that my dad opened up a business where he was trying to get clean, healthy food to poor people.
Yes.
And on weekends, when my mother wasn't working in our family business, she was going to Cheetah, which is a female correctional institute in Wisconsin.
Wow.
And as you talked about your grandfather and the stories that he put in your lap at 5.
Yes.
These narratives have always been a part of what made sense to me and how to be in the world. I have never not known a sense of responsibility for people who have less than I do. It's just never, I've never lived in the world that way.
Yes.
And so, I don't know if it was my disgust or fear about the future of the planet that was the first seed that grew into Grant Blvd.
Yes.
I don't know if it was having my kids in the suburbs, trying to get them to think about mass incarceration and compassion for people who have committed, sometimes horrific acts, sometimes minor crimes. But they were forged in the same fire. And so it's difficult for me to know which metal what sharpened what, because they came together in what I think is a beautiful symphony. And they've really just, I figured that there's no reason why I can't do both.
Yes.
I can deliver a good that I feel proud of because I know it sits in my place of responsibility to the planet, while also being mindful of bringing into that conversation people who are they just need more advocates. People who just need advocates, point blank, period.
Yes.
I think that's a doable task.
Wow.
So, I just got to execute.
I think that's incredible. And when I look at you, when I hear your journey, it's interesting because I have an agriculture background first, and then I have a radio and television background, and then now I have an MBA. And I work in business development, and ironically enough, work in transportation. So when I think about, all the modes of how people live, travel, and sustain themselves, I've literally intersected with all of those different
those places,
mm-hmm. industries, alike. And so with that being said, I'm listening to your story, and so have you. And so, I would love for you to talk to our audience about how you have been able to take apparel from local thrift stores and engage with these various inmates, returning citizens, and help them to look at this as an opportunity to advance themselves, but then also keep the local dollars circulating because, they're all wards of the state. Yeah. So how do you justify this in your conversation to them?
So I think that I have to back up with our timeline. So we are, since conception has been about 2 years, since real full launch, maybe about 8 months. And what we've been spending a lot of time doing is putting together our partners because the conversations that need to happen and moving forward in order to really become an anchor of a community, which is what I'd like for this brand to do. We think about where does this brand go, right? So in the beginning, it starts out as we're going to train a handful of people and get our processes together around employee supports.
Yes.
So like human resources, I'm thinking more like a lot more broadly about what it is that people who are who are returning need, and then working with my collaborative partners, the Center for Returning Citizens, about mapping out what that needs to look like, what those supports need to look like, and then setting up a manufacturing facility in Philly. But ultimately, thinking broadly, this is something that every city needs.
Yes.
You know, every city needs manufacturing jobs. Every city needs CEOs who are rooting specifically for returning citizens.
Yes.
Because if CEOs don't exist that root for them, then we know what happens.
Yes.
So that's the ambition is, you know, how do we figure out how to bring a myriad of supports into one conversation, including cities?
Yes.
You know, I'm really excited to have a meeting this week with this Center for Reentry here in the city, and the Center for you know, just the Coalition for Reentry here, and figuring out how do cities come into this conversation of supporting local businesses and doing the heavy lifting of making sure that returning citizens have what they need to be successful.
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think that there's no way. Every indicator tells us that's what has to happen.
And you know what I love is that you saw a need and you understood in order to fill the need or to address the need, you had to create community around another isolated community.
That's correct. That's absolutely right.
And so just being one person with a vision who's doing many things.
And, you know, I think one thing that I too think that I think all of us have this. If all of us sit with our own stories, there are beautiful points of intersection that we may not be necessarily settled with. You know, for me, it means having a life of sitting at the intersections, of just living at the intersections, of knowing what it's been like to be marginalized as a Black person, as a woman, as someone whose parents converted to Islam when I was 5, and covering as a teenager, and, you know, having just an interesting professional career, and giving myself permission to play in different careers.
Yes.
And then trying to leverage all that life experience, all that professional experience, for me, all that academic experience, into like, what is the highest coming together of all those things? What does that special sauce that is uniquely me look like?
Yes.
And I think that we all have that unique simmering, that unique roux of things that make us, that really could empower us to do some just uniquely us things. And I think that's also a privilege, right? To have the space to think about how do my experiences come into one place of, you know, I don't know, just of unique potential.
Yes.
And I'm really grateful that the universe, that the ancestors, that, you know, I use the word God, that all of those positive energies, I think, are kind of helping to propel me into a leveling up that is of direct service to people whose needs I recognize.
Yes.
And I think we all have that obligation to just pause and see, like, is it the $5 I can give? That kind of philanthropy can be helpful. Is it the 5 hours a week I can give, or the 1 hour a week I can give? You know, we just have to figure out where is our lane to where we can be of more service, because that's what we have, some complicated problems to solve.
Yes.
And it cannot rest in the palms of a few. All of us have to open up our hands and dirty them. And the greater ambition of being of help to other people, and recognizing our privilege, and then moving forward with a deep sense of just like gratitude and of service. And that's, I really am so excited about this project and its continued evolution, because I really want to ground it in the intentionality of doing just that.
Incredible. Incredible. My name is Tiffany Spraggins-Payne, and I'm signing off.
Hey everybody, Ryan Martin here again. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Zigzag. Now, don't forget to subscribe and let your friends and family know about us. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, this is part 1 of 2, and part 2 will be airing next week. Thank you for listening.